Hey guys, welcome back. In this episode, we're going to work on the inventory system, or we're going to actually create the inventory system, because what we have right now is just a placeholder to test things. And so what we want is we want a system so that we can create items and store items in a database, and then take that the data from the database and use it in our player inventory, so we can add items and remove items. And then the items that's actually in the inventory of the player, we want to be able to use them or equip them or drink them, whatever it is that the item does. We want to be able to do that. So to do that, we have to start with designing the inventory controller. And what I have right now for the inventory controller is just, again, just a placeholder. We create a couple items statically in the actual controller itself, which is not how we will handle it. So let's do that first. I'm going to jump into inventory controller. And what I want to happen in here is nothing that's happening currently, pretty much. I'm going to get rid of all that because we're not going to be equipping our sword by hitting V. And then I'm going to get rid of the thing that we create, the items that we create. We're not going to create items that way anymore. So that's pretty much all we have is the references to the controllers for the player weapon and the consumable. And that's pretty cool. So much like our dialogue controller, the manager for our dialogue, we're going to implement the singleton pattern into our inventory controller as well, because we're going to be referencing it from a lot of different places, doing a lot of different things. And for now, using the global-esque approach would be the easiest way to go about it, instead of passing around the references to it. So I'm going to have a static instance, just like we did before, inventory controller, and it's going to be called instance. And it's a property, so we're going to get and set. Oh, don't know how that happened there. And then in start, we're going to check and see if the instance is null, and if it is not, we're going to set it to be equal to this instance. So if instance is not equal to null, and instance is not equal to this, so if it's already not a reference to this, so if it's neither of those things, if instance is not equal to null and it's also not equal to this, which means it is a reference to another inventory controller, which means we would have two instances, which kind of breaks the whole point of this. We're going to destroy it. So this one no longer exists because this one is invalid. This one is a reference to a different instance of this exact same thing. So we have two instances happening, which is not what we want. We want just one instance that we can count on every time. So else, if that's not true, which means it either is null or it is an instance to something else, we want to set it to be equal to this. Simple as that. We talked about that before. I'm just going to go over it again just in case you forgot, because that was a while ago. And that's all we're going to have there for now. And then I want to actually we're going to set up the item database. Now this is going to consist of a couple of methods for building the database from a JSON file. So we're going to have all of our items defined in JSON. That way it's easy to work with. We can build editors around it, and it's very simple. And then we're also going to have a method for going through the collection that we generate from the JSON file and finding an item by name or ID or whatever it is we set up. And then we're going to use those items as a way to actually populate the player's inventory, or say we complete a quest. We want the NPC to be able to give the player an item. We don't want it to give them any item. We want it to give a defined item, something that has properties and values. So we'll grab it from the item database. So to do that, first of all, I'm going to create the script. I'm going to call it item database. As you'd expect, go ahead and open that up. And then back into Unity. As I said, the items are going to be defined in a JSON file. So they're going to be in our resources folder. inside of another folder. I'm going to call it JSON for now. And what I'm going to do is actually have a file over here because it'd be a bit easier than writing it from scratch. Then I'll talk about it. Just going to open this up over here first. So I have items.json. Now this is a very simple JSON file. Not a whole lot happening here. And you'll notice that the way I have it laid out, if you're familiar with the JSON utility built into Unity now, you'll be thinking this isn't going to work because of the way it's laid out. And that's correct. It's perfectly valid JSON. It's valid JSON, but the way we have it laid out and the way that we have our classes defined, there's no way the Unity serializer could understand how to populate our classes using this data. So we're going to be using something that's a bit more robust, a bit easier to use, but it is a third-party plugin. It is JSON.NET, but built or modified to work with Unity, since Unity is running on some old stuff that JSON.NET has moved past. So we'll be installing that through a simple Unity package. You can get it on my GitHub, and I'll link you to that in the description in just a second. But I'm just going to go over this real quick. You have a top-level array, first of all, and then you have objects, just like this. And the beauty of this, you notice that these are defined. They're both objects within this array, but they both have different properties, right? This one's missing stats, and that one has stats. So we can actually define items that do not have stats without stats, and that I don't like that that's capital. These are not. Different naming schematic and different naming theme, but that's fine. So we can have no stats and have stats, and we don't have to actually add stats and say like 0 and all that, and it won't null anything out, or it will null it out, but it won't say that the reference is null. What will happen is when I bring that in to populate a property, it'll just make it nothing. It'll make it null or 0 or whatever the property is. And that's what we want. So if it's a potion that doesn't have any stats on it, I don't have to define stats. And that's what we want. So I have object slug, which is what you know as the thing that we reference items with. The name is going to be the front-facing name, the name we use in the interfaces and all that. Description, just some text for the item. Action name is going to be the button you click, pretty much. So if it's a weapon, you're going to equip it. It's just what it's called. If it's a potion, you're going to drink it. Doesn't have any effect. It's just the text in the button, pretty much. Item modifier is going to be 0 or 1. So if it does modify, it'll be 0. Or if it doesn't modify, it'll be 0. If it does, it'll be 1. I guess it could be true or false. I'm not sure why I went with 0 or 1. And then stats. So stats is a single property that has an array of objects. Each object has a base value, then a stat name. Now this corresponds to the actual names and the values of our properties in the base stat. So if I go into my scripts and I track down, let's say, I can't remember how these are laid out. If I do base stat, you see you have base value and what was it? Base value and stat name? Yes. So base value and stat name. And then I'll create a constructor that's designed for this JSON file to take those values and use them to build the item using those stats. Pretty cool. And we'll get to that in just a second. So that's the JSON file. I'm going to use this in our project here. So I'm just going to drag this from out there into there. And this will be on the repo if you want to go ahead and get you a copy and use it. You can get the item.json file from there. And we will be using, if you go to github.com/GameGrind/json.net.unity3d, you will get right here. And this is just a fork of the JSON.NET for Unity 3D repo, just for my own using. And to get the Unity package, go to Releases, and I've got it set up here for you to download. Just click on that and download it, then bring that into Unity as you do with it in Unity package. And there it is. Now, if you want to get the repo of the actual game, go to Simple RPG in Unity, and here it is for you. It's all the stuff. I'm going to have it updated to each video as we go along, so you should have all the new stuff in there when you get it. Alrighty then, so let's get back into this and let's get started. So we're going to be building the item database first. So let's go ahead and get started with that. Now with this, I'm not sure about the approach we should take when it comes to referencing the item database. I feel like the only thing that's going to need the database... see, that's a thing. That is a thing. How many things will need to reference the item database? Would it be ideal to pass the reference around, or again use a singleton pattern approach? I'm not positive. So we're going to start with the singleton pattern and and work our way back from there if we have to. So again, item database. I know some of you purists out there do not like singletons, but you have to get over it if you're going to follow this series. And the same thing as before. If instance is equal or not equal to null, and instance is not equal to this, destroy game object. Else instance is equal to this. Okay, so we're not going to need, I don't believe we'll need this for now. The first method I'm going to have is going to be a private void, not going to return a thing. It's going to be called build database. Now this is going to handle, it's going to be responsible for taking the JSON data and converting it into an item, into a collection, in this case a list of items. So it's going to handle doing all that, and we're going to call it in starts whenever this whenever item database is initialized. We're going to build the database just like that. Now you should have, if you've actually already imported the Unity asset package of json.net.unity3d, you should have access to the namespace Newton. Oh, I have not. I said if you have, and I have not. So what I'm going to do is show you how to do this real quick. Is I'm going to go to Assets, go into Import Package and Custom Package, and I can choose it that way. Or I can go into my Downloads folder. So in my Downloads folder, I'm going to just double click on the Unity package. And it's going to go ahead and import it into my project. So I'm going to choose all of them and say yes, import. Now this is going to store it in a Unity packages folder, which I don't agree with that layout, with that structure, but we're going to keep it like that for simplicity. So now I have it in my project. What I should be able to do, after reloading everything, I'm going to use the namespace for that package so that I can reference the methods and classes within it without having to go through the namespace each time. So it's going to be Newton soft.json. So now what I should be able to do is go through and I can just say like JSON, and I can see all the JSON things that I can work with now. And that's good. That's what I need. So let's figure this out. What do I need? I need a list of items. So I'll make a private list. Oh, I don't have. I'm going to use collections and say make it generic so we have the actual list. You know all this stuff. We've done all this stuff before. So I'm going to make a list of item. I'm going to call it items. And it's going to be, I'm just going to make it a property. just like that. Now in build database, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take items and I'm going to say it's equal to. So we're not going to add each item one by one as we did in the inventories tutorials. I don't know how long ago. I guess it was over a year now. What we're going to do is we're going to take the entire JSON file and we're going to deserialize it into an object, which is a collection of these items. And that's going to be hopefully what we get. So we're going to deserialize it into a list of items and then make it equal, or set our items list to be equal to that list. In the end, it's going to look like that. So I'm going to do JSON convert, and I'm going to go to deserialize object, and I'm going to pass it a type, just like we've done before, of list item. And then I have to pass it the text of the JSON to deserialize it into the object. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to go through my resources folder, resources.load, and I'm going to be loading a text asset. Then I have to pass it the path. So we're already in the resources folder, so I know it's JSON/items. And what I'm going to do is take the result of that resources.load and do it to string. So convert it all to a string. Just like that right there. So now it's going to take that result, which will be the JSON file, in string format, pass it to the deserialize object method. It's going to work it all out into a list of items, and I'm going to set items to be equal to that. So now items should be equal to a built-out collection of these items. So there's going to be a couple of issues though, right? So we have, if you look, we have these stats laid out like this, and that's not something that we have in a constructor for our base stat. And all this stuff probably isn't the same. We'll have to go through and make sure it all matches, but I also want to make sure that I use the same convention throughout here. So we're going to keep it all just like camel case, since that's the easiest to go, since all the other stuff was. So in base stat, notice in my stats I have base value and stat name. And keep in mind, I can make as many stats as I want as long as I have it to back up in here, right? I can add as many as I want. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new constructor that matches that layout. So I'm going to have base value and stat name. Okay, so description is pointless. We could use description if you wanted to, but I'm not going to worry about it because it's going to be a simple system. So I'm going to get rid of description. I could probably just do that up here, but I'd rather keep it like this. And I'll keep base additives as a new list, because that means whenever I create this stat, it has a list to add these additives to, which are our buffs and our debuffs. So now what I have to do though is I have to apply an attribute to this method to say, hey, this is for the JSON.net. This is the constructor for that. So to do that, I'm going to go through JSON. Let's see, it's through Newtonsoft.json, and it's JSON constructor, and that's saying, hey, this is the constructor for whatever the JSON Newtonsoft JSON is working with. This is the constructor for that. So I also have to do that for my items, because my items are doing the same thing, right? They're deserializing from JSON into an object. So if I go into item, I have all of this, a lot of fun stuff. So what I can do is, for now, I guess we'll just say that this one is going to be that. So I'm going to do Newtonsoft.json.json constructor. And that should just line up. Note that all of these are properties. If you're using the JSON utility built into Unity, you'll have to convert all of these to just straight up variables, because it does not, the serializer has no idea what a property is. And you'll have more issues than that. If you have a top level array, you'll have to build out your own collection separately and then apply it to it. It's very, very cumbersome to work with slightly more complex JSON structures. So that's why we're going with JSON.net. So with that right there, and it's set up in here, we can see what we have now, right? So I can do a debug.log, and we don't need to have a string in there. I'll just say items 0, and what do we have from that? I want to know my stats, see if that's working. Stats 0 dot stat name, and that should be, if everything comes out, which it won't, it never does the first time, it should be power, I believe. So that should do that, and then that's calling that. So all I have to do now is put this in the game. So what I'm going to do for that is I want to create an empty. I'm just going to call it inventory. I'm just compiling there. Call it inventory. And I can have all my stuff that is handling the inventory on this object. For now, it's just going to be my item database. Just like that. So if I play now, what errors do we have? No initial errors. That's good. And it actually printed out power, which is good. That's what I want. So that's cool. I can also take, I can say power, concatenate onto that level is, and do items dot stats 0 dot get calculated stat value, I think is how we do it. Keep in mind, it's been a while since I've done a bunch of this stuff. I'm just trying to remember. Yeah, so doing this, going through and saying item 0 and stat 0 isn't how we're going to do it in the end. We're going to have a way to fetch an item from the database by name. Then we're going to have a way probably to fetch a stat by name, just to help out with that, so we don't have to remember the IDs or the indexes for our stats and our items, because once we have more than 5 items and 5 stats, it's going to get pretty ridiculous. So with that set up, I should see the power level of that item in my console. Power level is 2. Now, was that right? I don't even remember. Power level is 2. Yeah, so that's cool. Then I can test a couple of things. Let's make sure that both items are working. This should be null. This shouldn't exist because stat name, there's no stat. Yeah, okay, so that's what I expect. So if we were working with that, we would check. We would say, does this stat exist before I want to use it in the interface or use it to calculate something? Does it exist? So we have that. So I can say, make sure both stats work. I can also log out something else just to test some things. So item 0, and I want to know the name of the item. So item name. And this is the fun part, speed level is 4 and it's a sword. That's cool. So that is a start. We have data loaded in. We just get to work with the data now, right? So I can actually go in here and make items, and then I can do something with them. So that's cool. So before we end this video, we have a lot to do, I know, but before we end this video, I'm going to make just a quick little method. It's going to grab an item by the name, by the slug of the name. So I'm going to call it get item. Just like that. Actually, it's going to return an item, so it's going to be an item. And I want to do a loop. It's going to be a for each loop. So I'm going to go loop through each item in items, which is the list of all items. So item in items. Now, for each loops are very simple stuff, so if you don't understand that, I'd advise you look it up. But I'm just saying that I'm going to look for an item that is an item type in items. And I'm creating a new item object here. It's going to store the reference to that item that it finds in the loop. So each time I have a reference to the current item, the current indexed item. So to do with that, what will I do with that? I can say if, do a conditional here, if item.object slug is equal to, I need to get an item slug from this. So I'm going to do item slug. We'll pass the item slug to it in the form of like sword or big sword. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? So then it'll be item slug. And I may change object slug to be item slug. I don't know. I don't know. And then if it does match, return item. So it's going to loop through each item. If it finds a match, it's going to return the item that it found that matched. That's fine. Now, if it doesn't find one, I have to send something back, right? Because it's a return of item. So I'm going to return just a new item, or I can return null. We'll just return null. Just like that. That way we have a simple error to work with. We know where it's coming from. I can even do a log, debug.log, warning, couldn't find item, and then add on the item slug so we know what item it couldn't find, and we have a simple warning to help us find out what's happening. So that's fun, right? So that's going to be something we work with in the actual player inventory whenever we have to hunt down an item, or when an NPC is giving us an item, we'll go through and say, okay, get item, like I said, big sword or whatever, and it will look through the item database and pass it back into the player inventory. That way we have something to work with. And that's going to do it for this episode. In the next episode, we're going to continue the player inventory stuff. There's a lot to do. There's a lot to do in the back end before you even get into the interface. So I want to make sure we knock this out so we can move on to some more stuff, maybe questing, some very simple questing systems, but definitely questing. And what else was there? We're going to have what I want to do is I want to set it up where there's some form of a level, right? So we're going to have maybe like some terrible little dungeon thing. It's just going to be some blocks and stuff, but it's going to be a little dungeon thing. At the front of it, there's going to be a little NPC that'll give you a quest and say, hey, I lost my thingy in there. Could you go in there and get it for me and bring it back to me, and I'll give you something. So that'll be a way that we can actually use the dialogue and the questing system together there with the NPC system. And then we can go through and have to kill a couple things, therefore using the combat system, which is terrible, but again, it works. And maybe the combat system will result in it dropping a couple of things along the way. Maybe the NPCs drop things. Maybe we'll find a couple of items spread out, maybe a couple of chests to open, something simple like that. Then at the end, there'll be the item you're looking for. You grab the item and you bring it back out to the guy, and he'll give you a reward. How's that sound? Sounds like something we can work on, something we can work towards, and not really that far away, honestly. Once we get the inventory done and the quest system done, we can throw it all together to work out with that somehow. Thank you guys for watching. My name is Austin, and I will see you next time.